My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 65 years old, a widow, and once the quiet backbone of a family business my late husband and I built with our bare hands. For most of my life, I was content to stay in the background. I cooked the meals, kept the books, raised our son, and held our world together when storms threatened to break it apart. People rarely noticed me. I never asked them to. But everything changed the day my son got married. That was the day I learned what it means to be invisible in your own family, and the day I decided that silence could be sharper than any blade. I should tell you something right away. At my son's wedding, I did not mention that my husband had left me a business worth $7 million. I said nothing. I smiled when people passed me, nodded when they asked if I needed anything, and tucked the truth away like the folded handkerchief I carried in my pocket. No one in that room knew what I held in my hands. And thank God I stayed silent. Because just a week later, my daughter-in-law arrived at my door with contracts in her hand, her smile polished and confident. What she never expected was that her smile would vanish when she saw what I had planned for her. But let me take you back to the beginning. Weddings are supposed to be joyful. For a mother, they are supposed to be the day she is honored, remembered, and cherished. I wore the same velvet ribbon my husband once tied into my hair on our anniversary. I ironed my burgundy dress carefully that morning, pressing every crease as if neatness might protect me from the loneliness I feared. When I arrived, the ushers looked at me with polite confusion. One even asked if I was with the catering staff. That was my first sign. I walked slowly down the aisle toward the seats. My heart leapt when I saw Daniel, my only son, standing at the front with his bride. He looked tall, confident, like the boy I had raised to be steady. But there was no chair reserved for me near the front. My name was not written in the program. The usher, flustered, finally pointed to a row in the back. That is where I sat, behind neighbors I had not spoken to in years, straining my neck just to see my own child's face as he promised forever to someone else. When the vows were spoken, I pressed the handkerchief to my lips. It was a small square of white linen, embroidered with blue thread, given to me by my husband in our first year of marriage. He told me then, "Do not let anyone make you small." I remembered his words as I leaned sideways, just to catch a glimpse of Daniel's smile. At the reception, people passed by my table as if I were part of the decoration. One distant cousin asked if I was the baker. When Daniel finally approached, it was only for a moment. He kissed my cheek quickly, distracted, then rushed back to his friends. Victoria, my new daughter-in-law, came by later. She placed a small gift bag in my hand, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming, Margaret," she said. "Not Mom, not Mother, just Margaret." As if I were an acquaintance. Then she turned away, her gown brushing against the floor like a curtain closing between us. That night, after the music faded and the lights dimmed, I returned to my empty house. I hung the burgundy dress in the closet, folded the ribbon into a drawer, and laid the handkerchief flat on the kitchen table. The silence pressed against me, but inside that silence was something else too. Resolve. You see, everyone thought I had nothing. They thought I was just an aging widow with memories and a too-big house. They thought they could move me like a pawn, that my voice no longer mattered. What they never guessed was that my husband had trusted me with more than his love. He had left me the business we built together: trucks, contracts, land, and $7 million worth of assets, signed over entirely in my name. I chose not to say a word at the wedding. I let them look past me, let them underestimate me. Because sometimes the greatest power is not in speaking, but in waiting. And I was waiting. Waiting for the day when my silence would no longer be seen as weakness, but as the shield it truly was. Waiting for the moment when those who thought me powerless would find themselves face to face with a woman they never truly knew. The wedding was only the beginning. When the ceremony ended and the applause faded, I rose from my seat in the back and followed the crowd into the reception hall. The room was filled with light and laughter, with clinking glasses and bursts of camera flashes. I walked slowly, letting others pass, feeling like a shadow in a place where I should have been a guest of honor. My feet ached in my old shoes, but it was not the weight of the leather that hurt me. It was the weight of being unseen. Daniel, my son, stood at the center of it all. He looked handsome in his dark suit, smiling wide, shaking hands with old college friends and business associates. He had always been good at that, turning on his charm when he needed it. I wanted to believe he saw me, that he would look up and search for my face. But when his eyes swept the room, they never landed on me. Not once. Then Victoria came toward me, my new daughter-in-law. She was stunning, as brides are meant to be. Her gown, trailing behind her, like frost on a winter field. The crowd parted easily for her, as if even gravity respected her presence. She carried herself with the certainty of someone who believed she belonged at the center of the story. And perhaps she did. "Margaret," she said, her voice warm enough to fool the casual listener. But her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, cool, measuring me like a property she intended to renovate or demolish. I forced my lips into a smile. "Congratulations, Victoria," I answered, my voice soft. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, glancing over my shoulder before her gaze returned to me. "We're so glad you could make it." "We." The word stung. It sounded like an afterthought, as if my presence had been an inconvenience politely tolerated. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Daniel has been under so much stress with the wedding planning. I've been trying to keep things organized for him. You know how it is." Her tone carried no malice, yet the undercurrent was clear. She was positioning herself as the caretaker, the decision-maker, the new anchor in my son's life. In her eyes, I had already been replaced. I nodded gently, unwilling to offer her the satisfaction of resistance. Inside, however, I felt the familiar chill of being pushed to the margins. A waiter passed, and she took a glass of champagne without looking. She lifted it to her lips, her eyes never leaving mine. It was not what she said that hurt. It was the silence in between. The silence that told me I was no longer part of the circle, no longer needed in the places where I once mattered most. Daniel finally approached, brushing past a group of laughing friends. "Mom," he said quickly, kissing my cheek before stepping back. His voice was hurried, distracted. "Did you eat yet? There's plenty of food." I smiled faintly. "I had a little." "Good," he replied, already turning to leave. "We'll talk later, okay?" And then he was gone again, pulled back into the orbit of his new life. I watched him walk away, his hand resting lightly on Victoria's arm. She leaned in, whispering something that made him laugh. He did not look back. I sat down at a small table near the edge of the room, folding the handkerchief in my lap. The fabric was thin from years of use, but the blue embroidery was still bright. I touched it with the tips of my fingers, remembering my husband's voice. Do not let anyone make you small. But small was exactly how I felt that night. Still, I did not cry. I never cry in public. Tears are like secrets. Once you let them show, people use them against you. Instead, I lifted my head and breathed slowly, letting the ache settle deep inside me where no one could see. As the music grew louder and the dancing began, I remained seated, watching. Couples spun across the floor, dresses swirled, laughter spilled over the rim of glasses. I might as well have been invisible. Then, across the room, Victoria turned her head. Our eyes met. For the briefest second, it was as if the noise faded, the music stilled, and the entire hall disappeared. There was only her gaze, steady and cold, locking me in place. It was not anger, not hatred. It was worse. It was dismissal, the kind of look you give something you believe you already own. I held her gaze for a heartbeat, then looked away first. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew. She wanted to see weakness, to see if I would flinch. And in that moment, I decided that silence would be my shield. Later, when the evening ended and I left unnoticed, the echo of that look stayed with me. It told me what words had not. It told me that there would come a day when she would test how far her power reached. And it told me that I needed to be ready. When the wedding guests filled the dance floor, I slipped outside for a breath of air. The music still throbbed through the walls, muffled but insistent, like a heartbeat that was not mine. I leaned against the stone railing of the terrace, feeling the cool night air press against my skin. The laughter inside rose and fell, waves of joy that seemed to belong to another world. Standing there, I let my eyes wander over the lights strung across the courtyard. Each bulb glowed with a fragile brightness, reminding me of the first time my husband and I lit up the small garage that became our office. It had been nothing then, just a patch of cement, 2 rickety chairs, and a single phone. But we believed in it. We believed in each other. I closed my eyes, and the present slipped away. I saw him again, young and determined, his sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands as he bent over the first delivery truck we bought. His laughter filled the air as he teased me for bringing him lemonade in a chipped mug. "Someday," he said, "this little business will keep Daniel safe. Someday, it will be more than just trucks. It will be a life." Back then, I was younger too. My hands were quick, my back unbent, my heart filled with a faith that hard work and honesty would always be enough. I kept the books by hand, wrote every invoice, balanced every dollar. At night, when Daniel was a baby, I would rock him in my lap while tallying numbers by the faint glow of a desk lamp. The world was small, but it was ours. The memory dissolved, and I was back on the terrace, older, alone, my son's laughter muffled by distance and music that did not include me. I thought of the last days of my husband's life. His voice was weak, but his eyes had not lost their fire. He gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Do not let anyone make you small," he whispered. It was the last thing he ever said to me before he drifted into silence. Those words lived inside me, stitched into my heart, like the blue thread on my handkerchief. Yet at the wedding, as I leaned sideways just to see my son's face at the altar, I had never felt smaller. The sound of glass breaking inside pulled me back. I turned and glanced through the wide doors. Daniel was laughing, bending to pick up shards while Victoria held his arm. They looked like the perfect picture of youth and promise. And in a way they were. But as I watched, a a strange ache opened in me. I remembered Daniel as a little boy, running through our yard barefoot, his hair sticking up, his face smeared with mud. He used to reach for me with both arms, shouting, "Mama, look!" as if I were the only audience he needed. I remembered the time he won a school award, and he insisted I come to the stage with him. "She helped me," he told the teacher, proudly. "She does everything." Now he stood with his bride, not glancing once toward the terrace where I lingered. His arms rested easily around another woman, and I was no longer the center of his orbit. I breathed in deeply. This was not jealousy. It was something more complicated. It was grief, not for what I lost, but for what I had already been erased from. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips again, the fabric soft, almost worn through. It was more than cloth. It was the last piece of him I carried, a reminder that I was once loved deeply, seen fully, that love had not died with him, even if the recognition of it had faded from everyone else. As the night deepened, I realized the sharp truth. The past and present were colliding in me. The garage, the trucks, the promise, the whispered words on a hospital bed. All of it lived beside the sting of Victoria's cool gaze and the absence of a reserved seat at my own son's wedding. This was not just memory. This was the crossing point of then and now, of who I had been and who I was expected to become. They wanted me to shrink, to fit neatly into the background, to stay quiet while they rearranged the world. But I had lived long enough to know that silence can be chosen, not forced. And there is a difference. I turned from the window, letting the music fade behind me. I knew already what was coming. The eyes that dismissed me tonight would soon return, not with champagne, but with paperwork. They would test how far their new power stretched. And when that day arrived, I would be ready. I stepped back into the hall just as the music changed to a faster rhythm. The dance floor was full, skirts twirling, shoes tapping, hands clapping to the beat. Laughter spilled through the air, thick and warm like steam. I moved along the edge of the room, careful not to get in anyone's way. People brushed past me, carrying plates of food, glasses of wine, trays of desserts so elaborate they looked more like sculptures than something to eat. A woman I had not seen in years tapped me on the shoulder. "Oh, hello," she said brightly, then frowned. "I'm sorry. Are you one of the caterers?" I froze for a moment, surprised, but then I smiled softly. "No, I'm Daniel's mother." Her cheeks flushed pink. "Of course. Forgive me, it's just... You're sitting at the back, and I didn't..." Her words trailed off, awkward and unfinished. She touched my arm once more before hurrying away. The sting lingered even after she left. To be mistaken for staff at my own son's wedding was not just an error of perception. It was a mirror reflecting how invisible I had become. I returned to my table. It was small, tucked beside a pillar, a place no one lingered long. I sat quietly, folding and unfolding the handkerchief in my lap, watching the celebration unfold without me. My son danced with Victoria, his face lit with joy. They looked radiant together, and in some corner of my heart, felt proud. But that pride was tangled with sorrow. He never once looked toward me as he spun her across the floor. Then I heard a voice. "This is Margaret Holloway, the groom's mother." I turned. It was Alan, a cousin from my late husband's side. He stood near my table, introducing me to a couple who had asked who I was. His voice carried the weight of gentle correction, steady and clear. The couple nodded, embarrassed, and offered polite smiles. "Pleasure to meet you," I said softly. Alan gave me a look, steady, kind, almost protective. For a fleeting second, I felt seen. That is what I mean when I say sometimes another person becomes a mirror. His recognition reflected back the truth of who I was. Not a stranger, not a worker, a mother. A woman who had given her life to build the ground others now walked upon. But such moments are brief. The music swelled, and Alan was drawn away by other relatives. I was left once again in the quiet space at the margin. Plates clattered. Toasts rang out. I lifted a fork of food to my lips, but could barely taste it. Across the room, Daniel stood surrounded by friends. His laughter carried above the noise, bright and easy. He held Victoria's hand in his. They looked like the center of the universe, and I was orbiting far away. Another toast began, glasses raised high, words slurred with wine. "To Daniel and Victoria!" someone shouted. The crowd roared in agreement. I raised my glass too, though no one noticed. When the clinking ended, I stayed seated. I was not called to speak. My name was not mentioned. No one asked me for a story of his childhood, or to share a memory of the man he had been before this night. The microphone passed from one friend to another, but it never reached me. I thought about how many nights I had stayed up balancing books for the company, how many mornings I had packed Daniel's lunch, how many years I had bent over laundry, cooking, cleaning, believing all of it mattered. Now I was a shadow at a table, my presence mistaken, my history forgotten. Yet I did not allow myself bitterness. I sat straight, my hands steady on the table. The handkerchief lay open across my palm. Its threads glimmered faintly in the light. My husband's words echoed again. "Do not let anyone make you small." I let the music wash over me, let the voices blur. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was not the end of the story. The wedding was not just a celebration. It was a turning point, a reminder of where I stood and what I had been given. The night ended with cheers and applause as Daniel and Victoria left the hall hand in hand. Confetti rained down, cameras flashed. I slipped out quietly, unnoticed. No one called my name. No one asked if I needed a ride. I walked slowly to my car, the hem of my dress brushing against the pavement. When I sat behind the wheel, I placed the handkerchief on the passenger seat beside me. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Small, delicate, nearly forgotten, yet stronger than it appeared. I turned the key, and the engine hummed. Behind me, the hall glowed with celebration. Ahead of me, darkness stretched wide. I drove forward, into it. The night after the wedding was heavier than I expected. By the time I drove home, the silence in the car had become a second skin, pressing close, unwilling to let me breathe. The glow of the reception hall disappeared in the mirror, swallowed by darkness. I gripped the wheel tightly, my hands cold despite the heater running. The road was empty, but my mind was not. When I arrived, the house greeted me the same way it always did, still, patient, waiting. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the faint scent of cedar rising from the old wooden floorboards. I set my purse down on the entry table, slipped off my shoes, and stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the hollow quiet that followed me like a shadow. I went to the bedroom and carefully hung the burgundy dress back in the closet. I folded the velvet ribbon and placed it in the top drawer where I keep things I cannot bear to lose. Then I returned to the kitchen table, still polished from the day before, and spread my handkerchief out flat. The blue embroidery glimmered under the yellow light, steady and true. I laid both hands on it and closed my eyes. Images rushed back in fragments. The usher pointing me to the back row. The woman mistaking me for a caterer. Victoria's cool gaze, sharp as glass. Daniel's quick kiss on the cheek before he vanished again into laughter that did not include me. I pressed the fabric harder, as though it might absorb the ache for me. I had thought I would cry. Alone, with no one to see, I expected tears would finally come. But they didn't. Instead, what came was a dull, heavy weight in my chest, like a stone pressing down. Grief, yes, but also something steadier. Resolve, perhaps, though I did not yet call it that. The phone rang once that night. I checked the caller ID. Daniel. My heart leapt before my mind could catch it. But when I answered, it was hurried. "Mom, just wanted to say thanks for coming. We're exhausted. Talk soon, okay?" "Of course," I whispered. "Love you," he said quickly, distracted. "Love you," I replied, but the line had already gone dead. I set the phone down and stared at it for a long time. 2 words. Love you. Once they meant warmth, safety, certainty. Tonight, they felt like punctuation, a polite period at the end of a sentence already closing. I went to the sink, filled the kettle, and made tea. Steam rose, curling into the kitchen air. I sat with the cup in front of me, both hands wrapped around it, but I did not drink. I only watched the steam dissolve into nothing. At midnight, I walked through the hall, turning off the lights one by one. In the closet, I paused, looking up at the top shelf where old boxes sat. For a moment, I thought about reaching for them, but my arms felt too heavy. Instead, I whispered to the empty air, "I was there, Hector. I was there, but they barely saw me." I touched the handkerchief once more before going to bed. I placed it on the nightstand, its edges aligned with the wood. That was how I survived grief. Through order, through keeping things neat when life itself felt unraveled. Sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victoria's smile, polite but hollow. I saw Daniel's back as he walked away. I saw the empty chair at the front of the church, the one where I should have sat. In the early hours, I rose and went to the window. The yard lay dark, the bare branches of the oak tree etched against the sky. I pulled the shawl tighter around my shoulders and whispered again the words that lived inside me. "Do not let anyone make you small." It was not a vow yet, not a plan, just a whisper carried into the night. But sometimes that is how strength begins. Not with fire, not with fury, but with a quiet murmur in the stillness, waiting for the right moment to rise. When dawn broke, I made coffee, set the cup beside the folded handkerchief, and sat at the table as if waiting for someone who never arrived. The silence was still heavy, but inside it was a seed that would not stay buried forever. A week after the wedding, I decided to visit Daniel and Victoria at their new house. It was only a 15-minute drive, and I told myself it would be a small surprise. I wanted to bring something homemade, something that carried the scent of comfort. So that morning, I baked a batch of cinnamon bread, the kind Daniel used to devour as a boy. He would sneak into the kitchen while it was cooling, tearing a piece from the loaf with his little hands, his grin wide, his cheeks puffed out with crumbs. I wrapped the bread carefully in parchment, tied it with a ribbon, and placed it in a wicker basket. As I set it in the passenger seat, I rested my hand for a moment on the folded handkerchief beside it. I whispered, Let this be a gesture, Hector. Let this be something they remember as kindness. The drive was quiet. Suburban streets rolled past, neat lawns, trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes standing like soldiers. When I arrived, their house was bright and modern, a sharp contrast to the worn wood and history of mine. I climbed the steps and rang the bell. The door opened, and there was Victoria. She wore a pale sweater and sleek jeans, her hair pulled back into a smooth knot. Her face was calm, her smile practiced. "Margaret," she said. Her voice carried no surprise, only measured politeness. "Hello, dear," I replied softly, lifting the basket. "I thought I'd bring you something sweet. Cinnamon bread. Daniel always loved it." She glanced at the basket, then back at me. For a moment, she did not move aside. She stood in the doorway as though guarding the threshold. "That's thoughtful," she said, finally. "Daniel isn't here right now. He had meetings, and I'm a little busy." I shifted slightly, the basket still raised. "Of course. I just wanted to drop it off." She took the basket into her hands, her fingers barely brushing mine. She did not invite me in. She did not step aside. She only said, "I'll let him know you came by." The silence stretched. I waited, half hoping she might change her mind, offer a seat, ask how I was. But her eyes held firm, courteous, distant, closed. I nodded slowly. "Tell him I send my love." "I will," she answered. Her smile flickered, the door closing almost soundlessly between us. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood grain of the door. The basket was gone, the gift accepted, but I felt as if I had left part of myself outside on the porch. I turned and walked back down the steps, my shoes crunching against the gravel. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Thank you for the bread, Mom. Next time, just let us know first, okay? Love you." I read the words again and again. The message was kind on the surface, but it carried something else. Boundaries. A gentle wall rising between us. Let us know first. As though my presence was not welcome unless scheduled, approved, controlled. I sat in the car for several minutes, the phone resting in my lap. The bread I had made with such care would be eaten, perhaps even enjoyed. But I would not see the smile it brought. I would not hear the laughter it once inspired. I thought of the nights I had baked that same bread in our small kitchen. Daniel perched on a stool beside me, begging to lick the spoon. His face would light up as soon as the oven timer chimed. "Is it ready, Mama?" he'd ask, unable to wait another second. Back then, my presence had been enough. More than enough. It was the whole of his world. Now it seemed I was too much. An intrusion into the carefully curated life he shared with his wife. I reached over and touched the handkerchief again, folded neatly on the seat. Its threads were worn, but strong. My husband's voice echoed once more. "Do not let anyone make you small." The drive home felt longer than 15 minutes. The roads stretched endlessly, each turn pulling me further from the days when Daniel's arms had been wide open. When I walked into my house, the silence greeted me again. I placed the phone on the counter, the ribbon from the basket in my pocket. That evening, I wrote in my notebook. Date, time, words. I copied Daniel's text carefully, each syllable a record. It was not fear that drove me. Not yet. It was preparation. I had lived long enough to know that small slights, repeated often, grow into something larger, and I could feel the shift beginning, subtle, but steady. I closed the notebook, laid the pen across it, and sat with my tea. The bread was gone, but the ache remained. The phone rang 3 days after my short visit. I was in the garden, trimming back the roses that had grown wild, when I heard it echo through the kitchen window. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried inside, breathless though I had only crossed the yard. When I saw Daniel's name glowing on the screen, my heart softened for a moment. I thought perhaps he was calling to invite me for dinner, or simply to ask how I was. "Hi, Mom," he said when I answered. His voice was light, practiced, but underneath it I sensed hesitation. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I replied. "The house is quiet, but I keep busy." He cleared his throat. "Yeah, about the house. Mom, Victoria, and I were talking. We worry about you living there all alone. It's a lot to manage, don't you think?" I looked around my kitchen as he spoke. The walls I had painted myself, the cupboards I had scrubbed clean, the table that had been ours for decades. I saw not burden, but memory. "It keeps me moving," I said gently. There was a pause on the line. Then Daniel chuckled softly, though it sounded more forced than amused. "Of course, but, there are easier options. Smaller places, more modern, less maintenance. You wouldn't have to worry about repairs or the yard. You could just enjoy yourself." "Enjoy myself," I repeated, almost tasting the words. "And what about this house? These walls?" "Mom," he said, his voice lowering as if he were reasoning with a child. "It's just a house. Just a house." My fingers tightened around the receiver. This was the house where I had brought him home from the hospital, wrapped in a blue blanket. The house where he had taken his first steps, stumbled down the hall, cried in the night until I rocked him back to sleep. Every floorboard carried the weight of our story, but I did not say any of that. I only whispered, "It's more than that to me." "We just want what's best," he continued quickly. "Victoria knows a realtor. She could help with everything. It wouldn't be hard." Something shifted in me then. The cinnamon bread, the cool smile at the doorway, the careful distance in his words. I could feel the shape of a plan forming on their side, though they softened it with kindness. I knew better than to argue. Instead, I wrote his words silently in my mind, preparing to copy them later in my notebook. "Think about it," Daniel said. "No pressure. We'll talk again soon." After the call ended, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again. I walked slowly to the drawer, pulled out my notebook, and began to write. Date, time, exact phrasing. It was not anger that guided my pen. It was clarity. Later that evening, the phone buzzed once more. This time, it was Victoria. Her tone was sugar-sweet. "Margaret, I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to echo what Daniel said. We really do think a smaller place would make life easier for you. Less worry, less stress. And of course, you wouldn't be so far from us." Her words dripped like honey, but her silence between phrases was sharp. I answered carefully. "I'll think about it." "Wonderful," she said. "I'll have Daniel send you some listings. Just in case. No rush." When the call ended, I sat in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the lamp beside my chair. I unfolded the handkerchief on my lap and smoothed it gently. My husband's words rose again, steady as breath. "Do not let anyone make you small." I whispered them aloud, almost daring the silence to answer. Then I picked up my pen once more, recording her words alongside his. Each call, each suggestion, each gentle push. I kept them all. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The house creaked softly, as if reminding me that it had held me through storms before. I rested my hand on the wall beside me and thought, this house is not a burden. It is proof. Proof that I existed, that I built, that I endured. Still, I knew the calls would not stop. This was only the beginning. 2 nights after that second call, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound louder than it should. I walked through the hallway with only the faint glow of the lamp behind me. My hands trailed along the walls as though I were searching for something invisible, something to steady me. When I reached the closet, I stopped. I hadn't touched the top shelf in years. Boxes sat there, half forgotten, covered in a thin layer of dust. My eyes lingered on one in particular, an old tin box, edges worn, the brass latch crooked. I remembered Hector placing it there once, telling me not to worry about it. I never asked again. At the time, I thought it was just insurance papers or old receipts. But that night, something inside me whispered that I should look. I pulled out the step stool, climbed carefully, and lifted the box down. It was heavier than I expected. My hands trembled slightly as I carried it to the bedroom and set it on the quilt. For a long moment, I just stared at it, the metal cold under my fingertips. When I finally opened it, the smell of old paper filled the room. Inside were neatly folded documents, insurance policies, property deeds, tax receipts. And then, beneath those, one thick manila envelope with my name written across it in Hector's careful block letters. The sight of his handwriting made my chest tighten. I traced each curve of the letters, as if I could hold his hand again just by following the ink. I opened the envelope slowly. The first page was a title deed. At first, I didn't understand. I read it once, then again. 150 acres in northern New Mexico. In my name. I sat there stunned. Hector had never mentioned keeping the land. I remembered him talking once, long ago, about something his uncle left him. But we were so focused on paying our mortgage, keeping the business afloat, raising Daniel, that I thought it had been sold or forgotten. But here it was. Real. Undeniable. More documents followed. Survey reports, tax statements, a recent appraisal. The number at the bottom made my breath catch. $7 million. The business we built together, expanded quietly in ways I never even knew, was worth far more than I imagined. I pressed the papers against my chest, feeling the weight of them like a heartbeat. It was not just money. It was a legacy. It was Hector's last message to me, written not in words, but in deeds and signatures. I heard his voice again, soft but steady from those final weeks in the hospital. Do not let anyone make you small. At the time, I thought he meant the loneliness, the grief of losing him. But now I wondered if he knew more than he said, if he saw how the world might try to press me into silence after he was gone. I leaned back against the headboard, tears finally coming, not of sorrow, but of recognition. All these years, I had thought I was holding on by myself, carrying the weight of memory alone. But Hector had left me something more tangible, something solid, something that could not be erased by cold gazes or polite dismissals. I stayed like that for a long while, the envelope clutched in my arms. When I finally rose, I placed the documents carefully in the drawer beneath my winter sweaters, hidden from view but close enough to reach. Then I sat again, pulling the handkerchief from the nightstand. I laid it on top of the drawer as if sealing the papers with the strength of his words. For the first time in weeks, the silence in the house felt different. Not empty, but protective. Later that night, I made tea and sat by the window. The stars outside were faint, scattered across the sky. I thought of the land, distant hills, perhaps, open air, space untouched, a part of Hector still alive in the earth. As I sipped, I realized something important. Daniel and Victoria believed I had nothing left but this house and my fading strength. They believed I was easy to move, easy to dismiss. They had no idea about what lay folded in that envelope, and maybe that was my advantage. I whispered to myself, not everything needs to be spoken aloud. That night, I slept with a strange calm. The fear of being erased was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Quiet power. And power, I knew, is often safest when hidden. The morning after I discovered the envelope, I felt the urge to speak to someone. The weight of the secret pressed against my chest, not in fear, but in need of air. Secrets, I've learned, can rot inside you if they're left unspoken too long. And I knew exactly who I could trust. Nora had been my neighbor for nearly 30 years. She was a widow too, a woman whose life had been marked by battles she rarely mentioned but carried in her eyes. She once worked as a paralegal in a family law office, which gave her a sharp understanding of the subtle cruelties hidden in polite words. If anyone would know what to make of the deed, it was her. I called her that afternoon. "Do you have time for coffee?" I asked. My voice was calm, but she must have heard the tremor beneath it. "Of course," she said. "I'll be right over." When she arrived, she carried a thermos of cinnamon tea, her favorite. We sat at the table beneath the kitchen window, the same place where I had once taught Daniel to do his homework. The sunlight fell across the wood, turning the steam from our cups into little clouds. For a while, we spoke of ordinary things. The roses in her yard, the weather turning colder, the ache in her knees when the rain came. But I could not keep the truth in any longer. I rose, went to the bedroom, and returned with the envelope. I laid it on the table between us. Nora looked at me, her brow furrowed. "What's this?" "Something Hector left me," I whispered. My fingers trembled as I opened the flap and slid the deed across to her. She adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes scanning each line. With every page she turned, her expression grew more serious. Finally, she set the documents down and met my gaze. "Margaret," she said, slowly, "do you understand what this is?" "I do now," I answered. 150 acres, 7 million in value. He never told me. She leaned back, her hands folded. "This changes everything. And if Daniel or Victoria knew, it would explain their sudden interest in your house. They might not just be circling. They might already be planning." The words sank into me like stones in water. I nodded, my lips pressed tight. "That's why I came to you. I don't know the steps to take, but I know I cannot be careless." Nora reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "Then listen carefully. First, you need to gather every document. Insurance, deeds, wills. Keep them organized. Second, do not sign anything, no matter how harmless it looks. And third, we'll find you a lawyer, someone who works for you, not for them." I swallowed hard. "Do you think it will come to that?" Her eyes were steady. "I think they will come smiling, but smiles can be sharp. You'll need protection." For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. The clock ticked steadily. Outside, a bird called. I held her gaze, grateful for the steadiness she offered. "I don't want to fight my own son," I whispered. Nora's voice softened. "This isn't about fighting. It's about protecting what's yours. You gave your life to that family, to that business. If they can't honor that, you must." Her words cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. For so long, I had believed love was enough to guard me. But love, I was learning, could be rewritten in the hands of others. Nora sipped her tea, then reached into her bag. She placed a small black device on the table. A voice recorder. "Keep this with you," she said. "If they visit, if they call, press this button. Record everything. It may feel unnecessary now, but later you'll be glad." I picked it up, turning it in my hand. It was small enough to hide in an apron pocket. Light, but solid. "Do you really think—" "Yes," she interrupted gently. "I've seen too many cases. Good people, trusting people, losing everything because they believed in kind voices. Don't make that mistake." I nodded, slipping the recorder into my pocket. The weight was barely there, but it carried the gravity of choice. We finished our tea in silence, two women sitting with history and possibility spread out between us. When Nora finally stood to leave, she hugged me tightly, her arms strong despite the years. "You're not alone in this," she said. After she left, I gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and returned them to the drawer beneath my sweaters. I touched the handkerchief once more, the blue embroidery steady beneath my fingers. That night, as I prepared for bed, I whispered to myself, "Not alone." It was both a reminder and a promise. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to strength stirring beneath the ache. The kind of strength that grows not from noise or fury, but from preparation, patience, and quiet resolve. The following week, I took Nora's advice and scheduled an appointment with a lawyer she trusted. His name was Sinclair Rivas. Even saying it out loud to myself felt like a small act of defiance, as if speaking his name gave me a shield I had not realized I needed. I remember the morning clearly. I rose early, ironed a simple blouse, and chose a skirt that still carried the faint scent of cedar from my closet. As I dressed, I pressed the blue handkerchief into my pocket. It was no longer just fabric. It was courage stitched into cloth. The drive downtown was quiet. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, though the roads were smooth. I had not been to an office building in years, not since Hector was alive, and we'd visited accountants and bankers together. This time, I went alone. But alone did not mean weak. Mr. Rivas's office was on the third floor of a brick building, its windows shaded by old oak trees. The moment I stepped inside, I smelled pine and leather. Books lined the shelves, heavy with years of law and precedent. The air carried order, calm, and something else. Respect. He stood as I entered, offering a firm handshake. His eyes were kind but sharp, the sort of eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice steady. "It's good to meet you." I nodded, my voice quiet. "Thank you for seeing me." We sat across from each other at his wide oak desk. I placed the manila envelope before him. My fingers lingered on it for a moment before letting go, as though releasing not just papers, but a part of myself. He opened it carefully, reading each page in silence. His brow furrowed slightly as he scanned the numbers, the deeds, the appraisal. At last, he set the documents down and leaned forward. "This land," he said, tapping the papers with one finger, "is not only valuable, it's power. Power you may not even realize you hold." I folded my hands in my lap. "I didn't know. Hector never told me. At least, not directly." Mr. Rivas nodded. "Sometimes silence is protection, but now that you know, you must decide how to guard it. Have you told anyone else?" I shook my head. Only Nora, and I trust her with my life. Good, he replied. Because if your son and his wife are already pressing you about selling your house, they may not stop there. Families often underestimate the elderly. They assume silence means ignorance. But you have more than memory on your side. You have proof. His words steadied me. For so long I had felt small, erased, a shadow at my own son's wedding. Now, with every page he reviewed, I felt myself expanding again, like air filling a collapsed lung. He explained what could be done, creating a living trust, moving the ranch, the house, and my savings under legal protection, with contingencies only I could alter. Each step he outlined felt like laying stones across a river, building a bridge I could walk without fear of drowning. I want to understand, I told him. Every line, every decision. I don't want this to be done for me. I want it done with me. He smiled slightly. That's wise. Too many people your age lose everything, not because they are unwise, but because they trust the wrong smiles. We'll make sure that doesn't happen here. I breathed deeply, letting his words settle. For the first time in months, I felt less like a burden and more like a woman with choices. Before I left, he gave me a folder with the first set of documents to review. He explained them patiently, never rushing, ensuring I could follow every clause. When I thanked him, he shook his head. You're the one doing the hard part, Mrs. Holloway. You're choosing not to be silent. I carried the folder to my car, placed it gently on the passenger seat beside my handkerchief, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The late afternoon sun slanted across the windshield, warming my hands. As I drove home, I realized something important. Silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It is strategy. And now, I had both silence and the law on my side. That night, I placed the folder in my locked cabinet alongside the envelope. I brewed tea, sat by the window, and whispered to myself, I am not small. The words did not feel like hope. They felt like truth. 2 days after my meeting with Mr. Rivas, the phone rang again. The afternoon light spilled across my living room floor, soft and golden, as if nothing in the world could be cruel. But cruelty often wears its gentlest mask. When I picked up, it was Daniel's voice first. Mom, he said, smooth as, honey, how are you? We've been thinking about you. It struck me, those words, thinking about you, not feeling, not missing, just thinking, a phrase that sounded tender but hollow. I'm well, I answered. The garden's coming along. The roses are blooming late this year. That's wonderful, he said quickly, and then there was a pause. I could almost hear the turn in his voice, like a stage actor shifting into his next line. Mom, Victoria and I were talking again. We worry that the upkeep of your house is wearing on you. You shouldn't have to carry so much. You deserve an easier life. Before I could answer, Victoria's voice floated in, sweet as sugar. Margaret, hi, it's me. I just wanted to say, we only want what's best for you. We love you so much, and it breaks our hearts to think of you working so hard on that big old house. I pressed the receiver closer to my ear, the faint whir of the recorder in my apron pocket already running. Their words dripped like nectar, each syllable calculated, as if the right coating of sweetness might hide the bite beneath. Thank you for your concern, I said quietly, but the house keeps me busy. I like it that way. Of course, Victoria replied, her tone warm enough to melt butter. But imagine how nice it would be to wake up without worry. No creaky stairs, no leaking pipes, No garden to fuss over. Just peace, Mom. And if you ever needed anything, we'd be right there. The word peace lodged in my chest. They were offering me peace as though it were a product they could sell, as though my life, my history, the years etched into the walls of this house, could be traded away for convenience. Daniel came back on the line. We're not saying you have to decide now, just think about it. There are so many beautiful condos nearby. Low maintenance, great amenities. It would make us feel better knowing you're safe. Safe. That word, too, twisted strangely in my ear. Safe from what? From the memories that lived in every corner of these rooms? From the quiet strength Hector left me? Or safe for them? Safe from my independence? Safe from me holding the reins of my own life? I let silence hang for a moment, long enough that I imagined Daniel shifting uncomfortably. I'll think about it, I said finally, my voice even. That's all we ask, he said quickly. We'll help with everything. No stress for you. After we hung up, I stayed in the kitchen, the phone still warm in my hand. I set it down gently and reached into my pocket, pulling out the small recorder. I stopped the tape and placed it on the table. Its quiet red light felt like a witness, proof that I was not imagining the softness laced with steel in their voices. I opened my notebook, dated the page, and copied their words, word for word. I underlined peace and safe, because sometimes the sweetest words are the sharpest traps. As I wrote, I thought of Hector again. He had known, somehow, that I would face this, that the strength I once gave freely would one day be measured, weighed, and perhaps even taken if I allowed it. His voice echoed, steady as ever. Do not let anyone make you small. I closed the notebook and laid my hand flat on its cover. My heart ached. Yes, it is a particular pain when kindness becomes currency, when love is spoken like a rehearsed line. But alongside the ache was a quiet fire. Each call, each phrase, each carefully chosen word, they were not making me smaller. They were building the case that I would one day need. That night, as I folded laundry in the stillness, the phone buzzed again. A text from Victoria. You're such a blessing, Margaret. We'll always take care of you. Sleep well. I stared at the words. A blessing. I typed no reply. Instead, I switched off the lamp, slid the recorder back into my pocket, and whispered to myself, I will take care of me. The sweetness of their words still lingered, but now I recognized it for what it was. Not nectar, but bait. And I would not bite. After the honeyed phone calls, I knew what was coming. The words peace and safe lingered in my ears, but they were not gifts. They were signals. The sweetness was only the prelude. Sooner or later, the request would arrive dressed as care, but sharp as command, and I needed to be ready. The next morning, I cleared the kitchen table and laid out everything I had. The manila envelope, the folder Mr. Rivas gave me, my notebook filled with dates and exact phrases. I placed the recorder beside them, its red light ready to glow again. I looked at the collection and realized it was no longer just paper and ink. It was my shield. Still, shields are only as strong as the hands that carry them. And so I rehearsed. Not out loud, but in my mind. I imagined Daniel sitting across from me, his smile warm, his tone careful. I imagined Victoria leaning forward, her eyes steady but cold. I thought of the questions they might ask, the words they might use, and I shaped my answers in silence. I'll think about it. I need time. Perhaps we should wait until someone else can review this with me. Simple sentences, polite but firm. phrases that would buy me time, that would keep me from being cornered. I wrote them down in the margins of my notebook, as if I were studying for an exam. That afternoon, Nora came by. She didn't knock loudly. She never did. She simply tapped her knuckles twice, a rhythm I'd learned to recognize over decades. When I opened the door, she stepped inside holding another thermos of tea. Her eyes scanned the papers on the table. "They're circling closer, aren't they?" she asked. I nodded. "The calls are sweeter now. Too sweet." Nora sighed, setting the thermos down. "That's how it begins. Smiles first, then signatures." She picked up the recorder, turned it in her hands, and placed it back down with care. "Keep it on you at all times. And don't be afraid to let the silence work for you. You don't have to fill every pause. Sometimes not answering is stronger than arguing." Her words sank deep. Silence had always been my way of survival, but now it was strategy, a weapon sharper than anger. That evening, I practiced again. I brewed tea, sat by the window, and let my mind slow. I pictured myself not shrinking, not flinching, but steady, like the oak tree in the yard that had stood through storms, losing branches, but never its roots. I pulled the blue handkerchief from my pocket and laid it across my knees. I traced the embroidery with my fingertip. It had once been just a token of love, but now it was a reminder. I had been strong before. I could be strong again. Later that night, I called Mr. Rivas. His voice was calm, unwavering. "They'll test you," he said. "They may bring papers. They may bring another voice to pressure you. Do not sign anything. And remember, you don't owe them answers in the moment. You can always say, 'Tomorrow is better for decisions.'" That line alone has saved many people. I repeated it to myself after we hung up. Tomorrow is better for decisions. A shield disguised as patience. When I finally went to bed, I placed the recorder on the nightstand beside the handkerchief. I slept lightly, listening to every creak of the house, every shift of the wind. Not out of fear, but in readiness. By dawn, I felt something new stirring. Not dread, not sorrow, but a quiet determination. If they came smiling, I would smile back. If they came with papers, I would place them neatly aside. If they tried to make me small, I would not protest or plead. I would simply refuse to shrink. The house was mine. The land was mine. My life, my choices, my history, they were not bargaining chips. As I poured my morning coffee, I whispered into the empty kitchen, "I am not preparing for war. I am preparing for dignity." The words settled into me, strong and steady. And when the phone buzzed again with a message from Daniel, "We'd love to stop by tomorrow, just to talk through some ideas," I didn't feel panic. I felt ready. Because this time, the stage was not theirs. It was mine. When Daniel and Victoria said they wanted to come for dinner, I agreed without hesitation. My voice on the phone was calm, almost cheerful, but inside I felt the stirrings of a storm. This was what I had been preparing for. The notebook was ready, the recorder charged, the documents locked away. I knew their smiles would arrive at my doorstep long before their intentions did. That afternoon, I set the table with quiet precision. Not the embroidered napkins I saved for holidays. Not the silver set Hector once polished with pride. Just plain dishes, sturdy and unremarkable. I wanted no illusions of celebration. The house smelled of roasted chicken and thyme, a meal simple enough not to invite suspicion, but warm enough to carry the memory of family. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed the front of my dress, slipped the recorder into my apron pocket, and opened the door. "Mom," Daniel said, stepping forward with that familiar, boyish grin. For a moment, I almost believed it was real. Behind him, Victoria held a bottle of wine, her smile bright, her eyes unreadable. "Come in," I said softly. We sat at the table, steam rising from the food. Conversation at first was light. Traffic, weather, a new restaurant downtown. Victoria complimented the chicken, her tone smooth, but her eyes kept scanning the room as if searching for something hidden. Daniel laughed at small jokes, but each chuckle felt rehearsed. Then, between bites, the air shifted. Victoria placed her fork down gently, folding her hands. "Margaret, we've been meaning to talk to you about your future." I felt the handkerchief in my pocket, folded tight. My voice stayed even. "My future." Daniel nodded. "Yes, we worry. The house is a lot. Too much for one person. We've been looking into options, and we think it might be time to simplify things for you." I sipped my water slowly, letting silence stretch. Nora's words echoed in my mind. Don't fill every pause. Let them hear themselves. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her tone wrapped in sweetness. "Imagine living in a beautiful condo. Everything new, everything safe, no chores, no worries, and you'd be closer to us. We could see each other all the time." I placed my glass down, steady. "That sounds thoughtful, but I'm fine here." Daniel smiled again, though it faltered at the edges. "Mom, you always say you're fine, but you deserve more than just fine. You deserve comfort." My hands folded on the table, calm, measured. "And comfort, in your eyes, means leaving my home?" His eyes flickered, caught. Victoria picked up quickly. "It's not about leaving. It's about freedom. About giving you the life you deserve. And of course, it would help us too. We could manage things more efficiently if everything were consolidated." There it was, the first crack in the mask. Consolidated. A business word, not a family one. I let the silence linger again. Then, softly, I said, "Perhaps we should wait until someone else can look these ideas over with me. Tomorrow is better for decisions." Daniel shifted in his chair, glancing at Victoria. She smiled, but her jaw tightened. For a moment, the room was heavy with things unspoken. To ease the tension, I rose and carried the dessert to the table. Apple pie, Hector's favorite. The knife slid through the crust with a familiar sound. I served each slice slowly, deliberately, as though the rhythm of the act itself could keep me steady. As we ate, Victoria tried again, her voice softer now. "We only want to take care of you, Margaret. You've given so much. Let us give something back." Her words should have warmed me, but instead they chilled. Care can be genuine, but it can also be currency, and I knew which kind this was. After dessert, Daniel offered to clear the plates. He moved around the kitchen with ease, as though claiming the space. Victoria followed, pouring the wine into glasses I hadn't asked for. They looked comfortable, almost too comfortable, like owners rather than guests. When they finally left, the hugs were warm, the goodbyes gentle. But as I closed the door, the recorder still humming in my pocket, I felt the truth settle deep inside me. That dinner had not been about chicken or pie. It had been a test, a rehearsal for the moment they would place papers in front of me. I turned off the recorder, wrote every word I could remember into my notebook, and folded the handkerchief once more. My hands did not tremble. I was not small, not anymore. They came back the very next afternoon. There was no pretense of dinner this time. Daniel texted first, a cheerful promise to talk through a few ideas. When I opened the door, he stood there with a pleasant grin and a folder under his arm. Victoria followed, immaculate as ever. A third man stepped in behind them, carrying a slim briefcase. "Mom, this is Paul Levin," Daniel said. "He helps families organize paperwork." "Consultant," the man added, voice smooth. His handshake was cool and brief. I led them to the dining table I had already cleared. The recorder was in my apron pocket. The blue handkerchief rested beneath my palm like a quiet pulse. Sunlight fell across the wood in clean lines. Everything felt deliberate, measured, unavoidable. Paul placed 3 documents in a neat row. Each bore colored tabs that matched the capped pen he set precisely at my seat. "Nothing binding," he said, smiling. "Just drafts to keep you safe and comfortable." The first page read, "Agreement to list the house for sale." The second, "Transfer of liquid assets to a jointly managed account." The third, "Durable power of attorney, Daniel Holloway designated primary agent." I breathed once, slow and steady. "These are substantial," I said. "They are simple," Victoria answered, tone warm. Her eyes never left my face. "You should not have to carry so much. At your age, decisions can be stressful. Let us shoulder them." "At your age." The phrase slid across the table like a blade. I lifted the pen, not to sign, but to feel its weight. "I will need my reading glasses," I said, rising. In the kitchen, I pressed the recorder's button just to be certain. Its tiny red light winked like a witness. When I returned, I sat without hurry. Paul began a gentle script. "Listing the house now captures the market. A condo would reduce risk and cost. The managed account protects you from fraud. Together, you and Daniel ensure transparency. And the power of attorney is an emergency guardrail. If anything happens, your son can act quickly." I read every line. I traced the margins with my fingertip. Time slowed until I could hear the clock in the hall. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table like a boy asking for dessert. Victoria folded her hands, the picture of patience. "May I ask," I said, "why the power of attorney lists no alternate and no springing condition?" Paul blinked. "Simplicity," he replied. "Too many triggers create confusion." I nodded, as if considering a recipe that used too much salt. "And the jointly managed account," I continued. "Who initiates transfers? Who approves withdrawals?" "Either party," he said. "Trust is the point." Daniel smiled. "We trust each other, Mom." I held his gaze. I remembered him barefoot in our yard, mud on his knees. I remembered the boy who once insisted I stand beside him, on a school stage. "Trust," I said softly, "likes daylight." Victoria topped off my glass without asking. I covered it with my hand. "I do not drink in the afternoon," I said. The room tightened by a fraction, a small thing, yet it drew a line. Paul slid the pen closer. "Initial here to acknowledge receipt. Sign here to authorize drafting. We can finalize next week." Silence expanded. I let it. I had spent a lifetime filling silence with comfort, with food, with apologies no one asked for. Today, silence would work for me. The clock ticked. A car door closed outside. A branch scraped the window. "Tomorrow is better for decisions," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not waver. I placed the pen parallel to the paper. I aligned the edges of the pages with the table seam. "I will have someone else review these with me." Daniel's smile thinned. "Someone else?" "Yes," I answered. "A lawyer who works for me." Victoria's jaw tightened before the smile returned. "We are not trying to control you, Margaret. We are trying to care for you. Care is a verb, I said. It leaves fingerprints. Paul cleared his throat. There's no pressure. Of course, you may take time. Still, the market moves quickly. Hesitation can be costly. Hesitation saves lives at intersections, I replied. It can save houses, too. Daniel pushed back from his chair. The scrape sounded louder than it should. Mom, you are making this harder than it needs to be. I folded the handkerchief once, then again. The blue thread caught the light. Hard and careful are not the same, I said. Careful is what built the roof over your head when you were small. For a moment, none of them spoke. The afternoon held its breath. Then Victoria stood, smoothing her blouse. We will give you the night, she said. We will return tomorrow. We can sign then. Tomorrow, I said, rising with them. We will have witnesses. Daniel searched my face as if looking for the old softness, the automatic yes that had followed him through childhood. He did not find it. He kissed my cheek. A gesture that landed like a stamp without ink. Love you. He murmured. I know, I answered. It was neither rejection nor acceptance. It was simply true. At the door, Paul offered a final brochure. Glossy promises of ease and safety smiled up from its cover. I took it, not to believe it, but to keep the record whole. After they left, I locked the deadbolt. I set the folder on the table. I stopped the recorder and wrote. Dates, times, phrases, the way the pen was placed, the absence of a springing clause, the word age, the word control, the word trust, spoken like a sales pitch. Then I washed my hands. I brewed tea. I stood at the window while the kettle hissed. The yard lay still. The oak held its ground. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips and whispered the sentence that had become my anchor. Do not let anyone make you small. Tomorrow would come, and I would not be alone at the table. The next morning arrived heavy with anticipation. I woke earlier than usual, brewed my tea, and sat at the kitchen table as dawn stretched pale light across the linoleum. The documents from yesterday still lay stacked in neat order, each one a quiet threat dressed as kindness. I didn't touch them. Instead, I placed the blue handkerchief on top, like a flag of refusal. By 9 o'clock, the knock came. It was the same rhythmic tap Daniel had used as a boy, but now it sounded rehearsed, almost mocking. I opened the door with a calm smile. Daniel stepped in, folder in hand, Victoria behind him carrying another tin of cookies she hadn't baked herself. And Paul followed, briefcase ready, his eyes scanning the room with professional detachment. But this time, I wasn't alone. Good morning, I said. I asked a few friends to join us. Nora stepped forward from the hallway, steady as an oak, her thermos of cinnamon tea clasped against her chest. Beside her came Mr. Sinclair Rivas, the attorney she had recommended. He was younger than I expected, but carried himself with unshakable gravity. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct, and behind him stood a young man holding a video camera, lens already recording. Daniel froze mid-step. Mom, what is this? This, Mr. Rivas said evenly, setting his leather briefcase on the table, is a scheduled legal observation. I understand you were about to present documents for Mrs. Holloway to sign. We're here to ensure transparency. Paul stiffened, his lips parting in protest. But Mr. Rivas opened his folder and laid down a stamped letter of representation. I act as counsel for Mrs. Holloway. Any agreements presented must be reviewed in my presence. Please, continue. For a moment, the room went silent. The kind of silence that makes your heart count its own beats. Victoria forced a smile, her voice syrupy. This isn't necessary. We were just helping. Then you won't mind an audience. Nora interrupted, her tone cutting clean as glass. Daniel's expression faltered. He tried to recover, gesturing for us to sit. Mom, you're overreacting. We only want what's best for you. I folded my hands over the handkerchief. Best is a word that deserves proof, Daniel. Let us see what proof you brought. Paul slowly slid the documents across the table, but his hands trembled. The camera lens followed every movement, a quiet witness more powerful than any signature. Mr. Rivas adjusted his glasses, flipping through the pages. A sale of the primary residence without independent appraisal. A transfer of liquid assets into a joint account where Mrs. Holloway's consent could be bypassed. And a durable power of attorney without alternate designation. These are not protective measures. These are instruments of control. The words hung in the air like thunder rolling just beyond the horizon. Victoria's face paled. You don't understand, I understand perfectly, Mr. Rivas cut in, his voice calm but firm. I've seen this pattern many times. Elder financial coercion, dressed as filial duty. It will not happen here. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he leaned back in his chair, feigning casualness. You're twisting this. Mom knows we'd never hurt her. I met his eyes, steady, unwavering. Love without respect is a leash. You offered me silence in exchange for obedience. I choose daylight instead. The recorder in my apron caught every word. Paul snapped his briefcase shut, his professionalism unraveling. I wasn't aware of the full context. If you'll excuse me. He rose quickly, nearly knocking over his chair, and left without a backward glance. Victoria stayed seated, her hands limp, her eyes darting between Daniel and me. Margaret, please. But I didn't answer her plea. Some silences speak louder than words. Mr. Rivas placed another folder on the table. Here are the protective filings we've already initiated. The house, the savings, and the business interests left by your late husband, all secured under a living trust. No action can be taken without Mrs. Holloway's explicit approval. He tapped one document for emphasis. And as for the ranch, appraised recently at $7 million, it is fully protected. The room stilled. Even the camera operator seemed to pause his breathing. Daniel's face drained of color. Victoria's fingers curled into her palms. I rose slowly, smoothing the handkerchief between my hands. You thought I was small. You forgot who taught you to walk steady, to measure before speaking. You forgot that silence is not weakness. It is preparation. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. The performance was over. The masks had slipped. Mr. Rivas closed his briefcase. That concludes today's meeting. Any further contact must go through my office. Nora moved to stand beside me, her presence solid, protective. The young man lowered his camera, but the weight of his footage remained like a verdict already written. I walked them to the door. Victoria lingered, her eyes searching mine, but I gave her nothing. No anger, no forgiveness, only the truth she had refused to see. Daniel followed, stiff and silent. Their car pulled away, leaving behind a quiet that felt less like emptiness and more like space reclaimed. Back at the table, I placed the blue handkerchief atop the trust documents. My hands no longer trembled. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me steady and firm. And in that stillness, I understood. I was not just keeping what Hector left me. I was keeping myself. The house felt lighter after they left. Still, I knew the moment was not finished. Mr. Rivas packed his briefcase, then paused with one hand on the clasp. "If you are willing," he said, "I will request a meeting this afternoon. Not here, at my office. The camera comes too." I nodded. Silence answered for me. By 3 o'clock, we sat in a conference room. Nora poured cinnamon tea into paper cups. The blue handkerchief lay folded near my notes. They arrived late. Daniel's charm was dimmer in daylight. Victoria's lipstick was perfect, but her confidence had a small crack running through it. Paul did not come. Mr. Rivas began without preamble. He slid copies of their drafts across the table, then placed our recording device beside them. "Mrs. Holloway's assets are not in dispute," he said, voice even. "Her home, savings, and business interests are titled solely to her. The ranch appraised at $7 million is protected by a living trust executed last week." He tapped the document. The sound echoed like a gavel. Victoria swallowed. "We didn't know. We were only trying to help her simplify." "Help whom?" I asked. "Me or yourselves?" My voice surprised me. It sounded like the woman Hector believed I was. Daniel shifted. "Mom, that isn't fair." "Fair," Mr. Rivas answered, "is exactly what we are discussing. Presenting a durable power of attorney without alternates, while pressing for immediate signatures, fits the pattern of undue influence. Bringing a consultant who is not independent compounds the pressure. Any further attempt will be documented and forwarded to the appropriate authorities." Victoria's eyes flashed. "Authorities. This is family." "Family does not fear daylight," I said. "Care leaves fingerprints." Mr. Rivas opened a thin binder. "Here are the statutes on elder financial exploitation and fiduciary duty. Here are recent cases. Here is the letter from my office memorializing today's record. You will acknowledge receipt now." He slid acknowledgement forms forward and waited. Daniel glanced at Victoria. She stared down at the paper as if it were a trap door. "We never wanted her money," she murmured. I unfolded the handkerchief and pressed it once to my lips. "Then you will stop treating me as an obstacle to it." The room held still. Outside, a cyclist passed across the green. A lawnmower droned far away. Mr. Rivas spoke again, softer. "Mrs. Holloway has instructed me to offer a simple boundary. She will manage her affairs independently. She welcomes relationship, not control. Any violation will result in immediate legal action." Victoria lifted her head. Tears stood in her eyes. "Margaret, I thought you needed direction. I thought Daniel needed support. I thought if we arranged things, everyone would be relieved." "You arranged me out of my own life," I said. "Relief is not the same as respect." Daniel's shoulders sagged. The performance was over. "I don't know how we got here," he said. "I was trying to keep everything from falling apart." "Things fall apart when the people who built them are erased," I answered. Mr. Rivas slid the signed acknowledgments into a folder. "This concludes the meeting." He stood, then paused. "One more note. Any prior drafts you left at her home are preserved as evidence." Victoria nodded stiffly. "Understood." As they rose to leave, Daniel hovered near me. For a moment, I saw the boy who once pulled me onto a school stage. His voice was low. "Mom, can we start over?" "Starting over begins with listening," I said, "not with papers." He swallowed, then followed Victoria out. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a knot loosening. Nora set a hand on my shoulder. "You were steady," she said. Steady wins. Mr. Rivas smiled in that small, professional way of his. You did not need me to speak. You only needed permission to be heard. On the drive home, the city felt brighter, the traffic less sharp. I rolled down the window and let the cool air lift a strand of hair from my forehead. At a red light, I unfolded the handkerchief and watched the blue thread catch the sun. Do not let anyone make you small. The echo was not a warning anymore. It was a description of who I had become. Back in my kitchen, I placed the new folder beside the kettle and set water to boil. Steam rose. The house hummed. I wrote today's date at the top of my notebook, then a single sentence beneath it. Exposure is a kind of kindness. It tells the truth where whispers used to live. When the kettle sang, I poured tea and stood at the window. The oak in the yard looked older and somehow stronger. Or perhaps it was only me, finally measuring myself by my own height. News travels faster than whispers, especially when it carries the weight of truth. Within a week of that meeting in Mr. Rivas's office, everything Daniel and Victoria had built on charm and pretense began to collapse. I did not push. I did not need to. All I did was hand over the recordings and the copies of their drafts. The rest unfolded like dominoes tipped by their own hands. The first call came from Mr. Rivas. His voice was calm, but edged with finality. The state attorney's office has opened an inquiry. It seems Mr. Levon, the so-called consultant, is already on their radar. Your documentation strengthens the case. I thanked him, though the words felt too small. After we hung up, I sat at the table, the blue handkerchief spread beneath my teacup. I whispered to Hector's memory, "We are safe." For the first time in months, I believed it. 2 days later, Nora appeared at my door with the local paper folded under her arm. "Front page," she said, sliding it across the table. The headline carried Daniel's name, tied to allegations of elder financial coercion. Victoria's photograph appeared just below, her polished smile frozen in ink. I traced the words slowly. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like mourning, the kind that comes when the mask of someone you love finally crumbles. That afternoon, my phone rang. Daniel's number. I let it buzz until it stopped. Minutes later, a message appeared. "Mom, please. It's not what it looks like. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I placed the phone face down and continued folding laundry. Some conversations do not need answers. The next morning, the collapse deepened. Mr. Rivas called again, this time with details. The Bar Association is reviewing Levon's conduct. He may lose his license. As for Daniel and Victoria, the authorities are gathering statements from other families. It seems you are not the only one they approached. The words settled over me like heavy snow. Others. I was not alone in this. My suffering, my quiet suspicion, was part of a larger wound running through households I would never know. By evening, reporters knocked at my door. I did not open. Instead, I watched from behind the curtain as their vans idled by the curb. When they left, the silence that followed felt like a sanctuary. Nora visited again, bringing cinnamon tea and her unshakable calm. "This is the part where the facade gives way," she said. "They may claw, they may beg, but the ground beneath them is gone." That night, lying in bed, I let the memories of Daniel as a boy flood me. His laughter in the backyard, the way he once reached for my hand on a stormy night. I cried, but the tears were not for the scandal, not even for the betrayal. They were for the boy who had forgotten the woman who raised him. The following week, the silence from him grew longer. Then another message, shorter, sharper. You ruined us. Are you happy now? I pressed the recorder in my apron pocket, though no one was there to hear. Into the quiet kitchen, I answered aloud. I did not ruin you. Choices did. By the end of the month, Victoria's family distanced themselves. Invitations stopped. Daniel's company announced his resignation. The man who had once filled rooms with confident smiles now kept to shadows. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt the ache of finality. Justice has its own flavor, bitter before it heals. One evening, Nora and I sat on the porch as the sun bled orange over the fields. "Do you regret it?" she asked gently. I shook my head. Regret belongs to silence. I spoke. The blue handkerchief rested in my lap. I thought of Hector, of his whispered warning. Don't let anyone make you small. The collapse was not mine to carry. It belonged to those who mistook my quiet for weakness. As dusk deepened, I realized something. Their downfall was not my victory. My victory was the stillness in my chest, the way I could sip tea without fear, the way the oak tree stood unshaken in the yard. That was enough. Tomorrow, I would walk into Almafuerte, the small legal center now blossoming from the ranch's proceeds. Women would come, carrying their papers, their stories, their hidden bruises, and I would tell them what I had learned. Sometimes the only thing you need to do is hold your ground. Collapse will come on its own. The collapse of Daniel and Victoria's schemes left me standing at a crossroads. For weeks, I lived in the aftermath, carrying both relief and sorrow. Relief because the legal protections Mr. Rivas had helped me put in place kept me safe. Sorrow because the child I had raised, the boy whose hand once clung to mine in thunderstorms, was now a man I could no longer trust. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the blue handkerchief folded neatly in front of me. The documents securing the house and the ranch were locked away, but the choice of what to do with them weighed heavily. I could simply keep everything, live quietly in my old age, and never look back. Or I could turn Hector's hidden legacy into something larger than my own survival. I poured tea and let the steam rise against my face. The words Hector whispered in his final days echoed, "Don't let anyone make you small." I realized that safety alone was not enough. Safety keeps you standing. Purpose lets you walk forward. The next morning, I called Nora. She came with her thermos and her practical calm, and we sat on the porch while the sun rose pale and slow over the oak tree. "I've been thinking," I told her, fingers tracing the embroidery on the handkerchief. "The ranch is too big for me, too quiet, but maybe it could speak for others." Her eyes softened. "What do you have in mind?" I hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of the weight of saying it aloud. A center, a place where women like me, widows, mothers, those overlooked or pressured, can find guidance. A place where no one has to face what I faced alone. Nora nodded slowly, as if she had already been waiting for me to say it. "Almafuerte," she whispered. "Strong soul. That's what you've become." The name clung to me like sunlight. Strong soul. I felt Hector in those words, the man who had once built a business from nothing but sweat and conviction, who left me a legacy not of wealth, but of choice. That week, we met with Mr. Rivas again. His office smelled of pine and leather, grounding me in the seriousness of my decision. "Are you certain?" he asked. Donating part of the ranch's proceeds to create a nonprofit will mean less for you personally. I am certain, I replied. The money was never the point. The point was to never be erased. If I can keep others from being erased, then it honors what Hector left me more than walls of land ever could. He smiled, rare and genuine. Then we'll make it happen. The legal steps moved quickly. Papers were signed, foundations established. I found myself sitting in a farmhouse at the edge of the ranch weeks later, watching volunteers paint walls in soft colors, arranging tables and chairs that had once been stored in barns. Alma Fuerte began to breathe, brick by brick, hand by hand. But decisions are not only about creation, they are also about boundaries. Daniel called again, his voice thinner than before, stripped of its old confidence. "Mom," he said, "please. We've lost everything. Can't we talk?" I listened to the silence on the line, then answered with calm finality. "I will not stop loving you, Daniel, but love does not mean trust. Until you learn the difference, my door stays closed." He said nothing. Then the line went dead. I placed the phone down without tears. That was my decision, too. Victoria wrote once, a letter that came folded neatly in an envelope. Her words were a mix of excuses and regret, but I returned it unopened. Some apologies arrive too late to heal what they've broken. That was another decision, to choose my peace over explanations that changed nothing. As Alma Fuerte took shape, women began to come. Some carried folders of paperwork they didn't understand. Others brought nothing but stories, voices trembling as they admitted their fears. I sat with them, poured tea, and listened. In their eyes, I saw pieces of myself, the doubt, the quiet ache of being dismissed, the weight of being told they were too old, too fragile, too small. One woman whispered, "I thought I was alone." I pressed the blue handkerchief into her palm and said, "You are not." That night, I stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the fields stretch under the moonlight. My decision had been made. I had turned silence into strength, loss into purpose, and inheritance into shelter. It wasn't revenge that brought me peace. It was this: the knowledge that no one else would have to sit at a table, pen in hand, pressured to sign away their life in the name of love. The oak tree at home still stood firm, but now there was another tree growing, planted just outside Alma Fuerte's doors. A young sapling, fragile but determined. I touched its leaves and whispered, "Grow steady, grow strong." That was my decision. To grow again. The first morning Alma Fuerte opened its doors, the air felt different, crisp, full of promise. I stood at the threshold of the refurbished farmhouse, my hand resting lightly against the frame, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the faint scent of cinnamon tea Nora had brewed in the small kitchen. A new sign hung above the door, simple but steady: Alma Fuerte, strong soul. The letters glowed faintly in the rising sun, as if the name itself had borrowed light from the sky. I took a deep breath. This was more than a building. It was a beginning. Women started arriving, some alone, others escorted by daughters or friends. Their faces carried the weight I knew so well, lines etched by years of keeping families together, eyes dimmed by being overlooked. I welcomed each one, offering a seat, a cup of tea, and the reassurance of listening. No forms were signed without explanation, no word spoken without respect. The first woman, a widow named Teresa, clutched a folder so tightly her knuckles blanched. "I don't understand these papers," she whispered. "They say my son needs control to protect me." I guided her to a chair and laid the folder flat. You deserve to understand every word. Let's go through it together. As we read line by line, her eyes widened, her voice trembling. I thought it was just love, she said finally. Love never hides behind fine print, I replied. She wept, not from despair, but from recognition. That day, she walked out with clarity she had been denied for months. Watching her straighten her shoulders as she left felt like watching a candle relight itself. More followed. Letters, deeds, wills, each carrying a story of trust nearly betrayed. Almafuerte became a place where silence broke gently, not with shouts, but with truth. At night, I sat with Nora on the porch, watching the sapling we had planted grow inch by inch. Its leaves caught the moonlight, shimmering like small promises. You've given them a lantern, Nora said once. I shook my head. No, they've always had the fire. I just gave them a match. Still, even as Almafuerte bloomed, the shadow of Daniel lingered. Weeks passed without word. Then a letter arrived, short, scrawled in uneven handwriting. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to see you again. But I see now what I didn't. You were never small. I was, and I am sorry. I held the letter in both hands, feeling the weight of his words. I didn't rush to answer. Forgiveness, I knew, was not a gift given lightly, but a journey that required steps on both sides. For now, silence was my reply, but not the cold kind. It was a space where something might grow, or not. Time would decide. One afternoon, as Almafuerte prepared for its first workshop, a local journalist arrived. She asked why I had chosen this path instead of retreating into comfort. I thought of Hector's voice, of the pen I never signed, of the oak tree that never bowed. Because survival is not enough, I said. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need to stand so tall that no one mistakes us for fragile again. The article was published days later. Letters began to arrive from across the state. Women thanking me for speaking aloud what they had kept buried. Some shared stories eerily similar to mine. Others simply wrote, I thought I was alone until now. Each letter became a thread in a tapestry larger than my own pain. I pinned them to a board inside the farmhouse, a wall of voices rising together. When I walked past, I touched them lightly, like one touches prayer beads. As the weeks turned into months, Almafuerte grew into more than I imagined. We taught not just law, but courage. We spoke not just of wills, but of worth. Women came with trembling voices and left with steady steps. Some returned, not for help, but to help others. That was the true measure of light, when it passed from one soul to another. One evening, standing on the porch as the sky blazed with sunset, I realized my life no longer revolved around what I had lost. It revolved around what I was building. Daniel's choices had broken something between us, perhaps beyond repair. But my decision had built something new, something wider than family, something that stretched like fields at dawn. I closed my eyes and whispered to Hector's memory, I carried your words, and they carried me here. When I opened them, the farmhouse glowed behind me, voices inside rising in quiet conversation, the sapling outside trembling with wind. A new light had begun to shine, not just for me, but for every woman who walked through those doors. And for the first time in years, I felt not only safe, not only strong, but free. The day Daniel returned, the light was thin. I was sweeping the front step when a single knock sounded. Not the old, playful rhythm, just one careful tap. I opened the door. He stood there without a smile. His hands were empty. Neither of us spoke. I stepped aside. He entered. We walked to the kitchen. The kettle was already on. I set cups on the table, laid the blue handkerchief between them, and watched the steam rise. He stared at the cloth as if it were an old photograph. When he finally looked up, his voice was rough. "Mom, I do not know how to start. I am not here to defend anything. I have been sitting with my choices. I do not like the man they reveal." I poured the tea. The cups clicked softly. I have learned that apologies are often negotiations in disguise. Today, I wanted truth, the kind that can survive quiet. He wrapped both hands around his cup. "Remember when I was 8 and the storm took out the power? You lit candles and told me a story for every flame. I thought you could keep the whole house standing. I thought I was protecting us now. I see that I was protecting my fear." I thought of the drafts on my table, the pen angled toward my hand, the word consolidated, and the boy who begged for one more story. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips, then set it back. "I cannot invite chaos in," I said. "Love and trust are not the same. Love is a river. Trust is the bridge. We will need time to rebuild one of them. I am willing to stand by the water." He nodded. "I would like to learn how to build. I do not want you to be small for me to feel big. I want to be decent without an audience." We drank, in silence. I breathed and listened. Outside, a truck rumbled. Something unclenched in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Space. He reached into his coat and set a key on the table. It was the spare from my house he had kept for years. "I will not use this without asking," he said. "I will not enter your life like a locksmith again." I slid the key back. "Keep it," I said. "Not as a pass, as a promise. Doors should open from both sides. Otherwise, they are walls." He looked at the oak outside the window. "Do you remember when Dad taught me to measure twice and cut once? I thought it was only about wood. I think it is about words." "It is," I said. "It is about where you place them. It is about who holds the saw." He smiled. Small. "Will you come to Almafuerte today? I want to see what you built. I want to set up chairs. I want to listen more than I speak." "Come," I said. "Bring your hands. Leave your speeches." He nodded. After he left, I rinsed the cups. The handkerchief dried in a square of sunlight on the table. I whispered to Hector, "We did not break. We bent until the wind passed." Then I locked the cabinet where the trust papers rested and took my coat. At Almafuerte, women arrived with folders and fears. We answered with tea, with law, with patience. Daniel stacked chairs, moved boxes, fetched water. He did not ask for credit. He asked for instructions. He learned to serve without control. Something in me eased, not a cure, a stitch. When the workshop ended, a woman pressed my hand and said, "I thought I was alone until now." I gave her the handkerchief for a moment, letting the embroidery imprint her skin. "You are not," I said. "None of us are." Dusk gathered. On my way home, the oak held its silhouette against a pewter sky. The sapling by the farmhouse shivered and held. I parked, unlocked the door, and placed a fresh key on the hook. The old one would live in Daniel's pocket. Tonight, I am thinking about bridges. They are not built with speeches. They are built with measured boards and steady hands. If you are listening to my story and carrying a quiet wound, know this. You can draw a boundary and keep your heart open. You can be gentle and immovable. You can be the river and you can guard the bridge. If you have lived something like this, share your story below. What would you have done in my kitchen? Would you keep the key or ask for it back? I am reading. And if you are standing where I once stood, remember the sentence that carried me through. Do not let anyone make you small.